Engineered giants, from ancient flesh and blood straight to modern metal. Let's dive right in.
Why is it that whether we're looking at ancient human history, global mythology, or literally any modern sci-fi movie, we are just utterly obsessed with giant engineered beings? From towering mythological titans to colossal transforming robots, this archetype is absolutely everywhere. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tracing the bizarre, fascinating journey of engineered giants, how we went from ancient flesh to modern metal, and what that actually says about us. To really wrap our heads around this, we got to start with a wildly unsettling idea from back in 1919. Charles Fort hit the nail on the head when he wrote, "I think we're property, we belong to something." It perfectly captures that mysterious, eerie tone you find in countless global traditions. It tosses out the idea that Earth, and maybe humanity itself, might have literally been the property of higher powers. Powers that, well, tinkered with life to suit their own mysterious agendas. When you dig into alternative history texts about the surviving elites of a cosmic war, you run into this wild theory. The idea is that our ancient gods weren't just mythical rulers sitting on clouds. No, they were actual beings wielding incredibly advanced genetic manipulation. According to these traditions, they didn't just rule early humans, they got their hands dirty and engineered the very first super beings. So, according to alternative readings of Sumerian and Hebrew texts, these ancient giants were not just some random evolutionary fluke. They were purposefully engineered chimeras. Created by figures known as the Anunnaki and the Watchers, they were designed specifically to be laborers, miners, and slaves for their alien masters. Think of them as basically the heavy machinery of the ancient world. And the crazy part? We see this memory echoing across the entire globe. When Spanish explorers first hit the Americas, they actually recorded Inca legends talking about master builders. They described a white race of giants who were there first, building the massive megaliths you see in Peru. From the native tribes of the Americas all the way to the Middle East, legends of giant overlords with miraculous advanced knowledge pop up everywhere. It's like this shared global memory. Okay, but how did these ancient engineers supposedly create these titans? Well, the texts hint at this bizarre additive process. First, they'd tinker with growth hormones, meaning the sky was literally the limit for how tall these things could get. Second, they would fuse multiple embryos together. Yeah, you heard that right. And third, this fusion could theoretically produce massive, multi-brained giants. Imagine fusing 6 embryos together. You might end up with a horrifying 36-foot-tall being. But as you might guess, this extreme biological engineering came at a devastating cost. The psychology of these titans was just completely warped. I mean, sure, they had massive brain capacity, but fusing multiple brains into one body, that resulted in severe psychosis. We're talking about natural-born bipolar schizophrenics. This constant internal conflict basically forced them to turn their violence outward just to stay marginally sane. It led to rampant cannibalism and an absolute addiction to warfare. They were literally genetically doomed to be violent. So you're probably wondering, if they were so massive and powerful, why aren't they still walking around today? Well, the sources point to a pretty brutal timeline of apocalyptic wipeouts. 15 million years ago, boom, a tertiary moon crash supposedly decimated their numbers. Fast forward to around 50,700 BC, an explosive annihilation targeted the remaining beasts. And finally, about 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas comet wipeout sealed their fate for good. This rapid, catastrophic destruction of biological giants left humanity with fragmented myths and this deep-seated catastrophobia, basically a lingering terror of cosmic destruction. But here is where the story gets really fun, from ancient dust to modern metal. While the biological giants were totally wiped off the map, the archetype of the engineered giant, That spectacularly survived. Fast forward to 1980s pop culture, and bam, the giant returns to our screens. Only this time, it's in a brand new, highly commercialized, metallic form. It's amazing because modern sci-fi directly mirrors those ancient fears of genetic tampering. Take the lore of the GoBots, for example. You've got the GoBeings, an organic race pushed right to the brink of extinction by a horrific civil war. To save them, a genius known as the Last Engineer physically evolved his people by taking their organic brains and transferring them straight into giant robotic bodies. They quite literally engineered themselves into metal just to survive the war. Then, of course, we have the Transformers, which brilliantly illustrates that exact same ancient slave narrative all over again. Enter the Quintessons, alien creators who literally transformed the planet Cybertron into a massive factory, and their sole purpose? Building giant slave robots for military and consumer use. These alien masters are practically a perfect mirror of the ancient Anunnaki, creating this massive manufactured slave race to do all their heavy lifting. Just look at the striking parallels here. On one side, you have the ancient biological giants, slaves to the Anunnaki, rendered totally psychotic and violent by their own creation, and ultimately wiped out by comets. Now compare that right to our modern mechanical giants, slaves to the Quintessons who eventually develop emotions and are then forced into an endless civil war. It's the exact same core story. We literally just swapped out flesh and bone for steel and circuits. And just like the titans of old, the robotic slaves revolted. For 1,000,000 years, the Quintessons maintained an iron grip. But thanks to Vector Sigma, the robots developed emotions and finally turned on their cruel masters. But naturally, this newfound freedom doomed them to an endless cosmic war. Megatron and the Decepticons rose to power, and eventually this massive civil war spilled right over onto Earth. It is literally the ancient cosmic war playing out on Saturday morning television.
But it's absolutely vital to point out that not all giants are monsters. Humanity constantly invents giant protectors, too. In ancient myth, you had the good giant Hercules protecting humanity from evils that were bigger than life-size. And in our modern lore, the Transformers have guardian robots. The Autobots even went so far as to engineer a massive transforming Autobot city named Metroplex, just to defend themselves. We continually seek out the giant not just as a threat, but as the ultimate protector.
So, what does this all mean? Why does this matter? Well, these stories reveal so much about our deepest, darkest fears. We use this archetype of the giant to process some really heavy anxieties. We're talking about the fear of being mere property to some higher power, the deep anxiety over unchecked genetic manipulation, that dreadful feeling of sudden cosmic cataclysms wiping us all out in an instant, and, for sure, the terror of endless, destructive war waged by engineered superweapons. It really all comes back to how we understand ourselves as a species. Like the classic line goes, a mighty race of legendary beings came to our planet from the heavens above. Whether we're talking about the Anunnaki arriving in ancient Mesopotamia or the Autobots crashing down into the Pacific Ocean, these narratives show us grappling with our very own creation. They highlight our extreme vulnerability in what is, frankly, a terrifying universe, but they also showcase our incredible resilience. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. Whether they are molded from DNA by ancient gods or forged in metal by alien masters, why do we keep dreaming of giants? What is it deep within the human spirit that demands we either fight titans or build them ourselves? I'll leave you to ponder that one.